Now, the general weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on Tuesday, January 20th, 2026. And to set things up here going into this mid and late week period, most of the active weather as far as any precipitation or low pressure systems and fronts is going to be out here through the western Bering. Areas along the west coast, we'll see some IFR conditions because we have weak high pressure and just an onshore flow keeping some lower cloud cover and ceilings going along much of the west coast. Otherwise, much of the interior, at least weather-wise, sensible weather, is not going to be that active this week. The next system of maybe significance, just a front with some snow or a light mix coming across the northwest coast through the Bering Strait, Chukchi area. You may pick that up later Thursday into Friday. And in the meantime, at least much of the mainland will have fairly dry weather, as well as the panhandle through the rest of this week. There will be a little colder air coming in to the panhandle because surface high pressure will reestablish itself over northwest Canada. But as promised, I was talking about well over a week ago, we'd at least see a little quieter and not as cold of a period of weather coming up here for the mainland as we go through this week. So IFR conditions there, Chukchi Sea coastline, all along the west coast, out through the southern Gulf. And then we do have a low pressure and a front pushing into the central Aleutians with stronger winds. That's where the turbulence will be. You can see that band of IFR conditions with mainly rain down here in the central Aleutians and some stronger and gusty winds along the west coast, keeping some lower cloud cover and ceilings. And again, the lower Gulf, North Pacific, there are some IFR conditions. And then into Thursday morning, we still have some IFR conditions across the lower Gulf, maybe brushing Kodiak Island. Band of IFR conditions up along the Yukon River into the Yukon Flats and much of the west coast and western interior, continuing to see some IFR conditions. Otherwise, south central, southeast mainland, and much of the panhandle, VFR conditions are going to reign here through the midweek period. And as we get into Thursday afternoon, we find IFR conditions southwestern Gulf, east side of Kodiak Island, and then in the interior along the Yukon River, between the Alaska Range and the Brooks Range, with that bit of moisture and shallow inversion, keeping some lower cloud cover, and certainly areas of potentially some fog. So again, that will extend out along areas of the west coast. So Anaktuvik Pass, starting out with IFR conditions, giving way to MVFR conditions. And for Adigan Pass, generally MVFR conditions should hold on Wednesday in the east central Brooks Range. As we come down along the Alaska Range, along and east and southeast of the Alaska Range, VFR conditions will be the rule. Now, Wednesday, as you get out toward the west entrance, and beyond, especially if you're flying out toward McGrath or Sleet Mute or those areas, you're going to encounter MVFR, IFR conditions. Rainy Pass, same thing, VFR, but if you're flying toward McGrath, those areas, you're going to run into some MVFR and IFR. Windy Pass, VFR conditions all the way east through Isabel and Mentasta passes, coming into the Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass should be VFR. And around Portage Pass, VFR conditions there and extending into Prince William Sound. And then across much of the panhandle this midweek period, Wednesday and Thursday, we're looking at VFR conditions, though there could be some areas of fog in the morning, late night and morning hours that could impede some flying. And as of this Tuesday morning, there are some dense fog advisories for areas of the southern panhandle. So we do find, at least for Tuesday, because of this ridge of high pressure in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, we have weak surface high pressure over the mainland with colder high pressure rebuilding over northwest Canada, especially later Thursday into Friday and Saturday. But in the meantime, in the mid and upper levels, we have a ridge, and that's why we have this warmer air aloft. It creates a strong temperature inversion. That's why you get moisture trapped beneath that inversion, and that's where you're going to have those IFR conditions. Very stable. And then out to the west, we do find with a frontal system working its way eastward that freezing levels are going to bump upwards a bit as we go through the eastern Aleutians. Now, Icing not a concern so much here in the mainland or panhandle, but with that frontal system, a low pressure coming out of the North Pacific into the western Bering Sea, we'll have some mainly rain with it, so there could be some moderate icing above 4,000 feet in the western Aleutians, and then south-southwest of the central Aleutians above 6,000 feet. And here we can see a reflection of that ridge axis over the mainland right now. And as we go, look behind me here, there is a core of winds in excess of 150 knots, a jet core there, coming up into the western and central Aleutians at 30,000 feet. And then looking at it from the perspective of mid-levels, 700 millibars, here's the ridge axis through the mainland and kind of extends down eastern Gulf. This is just a very docile pattern, but again, with these types of ridges in the mid and upper levels, it creates a temperature inversion above the surface, which can trap smoke and other pollutants, but also any low-level moisture. Back to the west, we find stronger winds, low pressure coming up along the eastern Asian continent, there along the Kamchatka coast, in a broad belt of 50 to as high as 70 and 85 knot winds trailing back from the west central Bering Sea into the western Aleutians. And then at 3,000 feet, there are some stronger winds out there over the Bering, back toward the far western Aleutians of in excess of 50 knots. We also find a little pocket of stronger winds up around Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. And here's the turbulence outlook for Wednesday, mainly there out through the west. There could be some isolated moderate turbulence off of the Lisburn Peninsula, Point Hope, down through the Bering Strait at Wales, Teller, and from St. Lawrence down to St. Matthew. And then as we get around the Pribilovs and especially the central and western Aleutians, we do anticipate moderate turbulence on Wednesday with the potential for some isolated severe turbulence along that frontal boundary, surface to 3,000 feet, especially there Wednesday morning into the early afternoon.